Hello, I'm Marine Ben Yehuda, the Prophetess of Judah, aka Linda Denise Swain Shepherd. Now today's topic is, when is lineage established through the matriarchal or matrial line, that is, on the line of the mother? Now I'm not contending that lineage is not usually established on the patriarchal line. We find that is a consistent theme in the Mosaic law as well as throughout the Hebrew scriptures. You'll find proof of this in Genesis chapter 5, 3 to 32, and in Genesis chapter 11, 10 to 32. So we're not contending that, so anybody who thinks so, settle down. We're looking at the exception to the rule. So again, for our topic today is, when is lineage established on the matriarchal line? Now to this end we go to Numbers 13:6, and we find here Caleb. So for Judah, Caleb son of Jephunneh. So Caleb is the leader of the tribe of Judah. He's the head of the tribe, but he is the son of Jephunneh. So we need to see whether Jephunneh is also from the tribe of Judah. To that end, go to Numbers 32:12. And there you'll read, save for Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, and Yehoshua, son of Nun, for these were wholehearted with Elohim. So now we see that Caleb his father is not from the tribe of Judah, yet he is not only a son of Judah, but he is also the head of the tribe of Judah. Now for the antecedents of the Kenizzite, we can go to Genesis 15:19. There you read, and the Kenites, and the Kenizzites, and the Cadmonites. And when you go to 20 and 21, you'll find the Amorite, the Perizzite, the Jebusite, etc. So these were a community of Canaanite or Kabiri tribes that dwelt together. Now I first have to say that when we're examining history, we have to assemble all the facts, all the documents, all the monuments that we can get our hands on, because what we need to do is lay a solid foundation upon which we can build a reasonable hypothesis to fill in the gaps that you invariably find in history. So we want to deduce from this a consistent theory of what was going on in the time. Now no one sat down in ancient days to write every single day, 360 days a year, going by the lunar calendar, all the way through history until we finally picked up a history book. There are always gaps, and we have to fill these out. Now we know that in Genesis chapter 14, Abraham meets Melchizedek, a Canaanite or Kabiri priest of Elohim, and he of Salem, which is modern day Jerusalem or Yerushalayim. And we also find Abraham naming one of his sons Midian. Let's go to that. I'll tell you where it is because I haven't planned to take you to it. It was when he was 99 years old. So you're looking at Genesis 25, 1 to 2. Then again Abraham took a wife, and her name was Keturah, and she bare him Zimran, and Yokshan, and Medan, and Midian, and Ishbak, and Shua. So there Abraham named one of his sons Midian. We know that the Canaanites were a community of tribes, and they formed a confederation of kingdoms, so each one having their kingdom. We can imagine that Melchizedek had one of these kingdoms, and in his kingdom he believed in Elohim and called on him with those that followed him. But later on, as the Canaanites developed, they became more and more idolatrous, although we don't find any evidence of Canaanite or Kebiri idolatry in the entire Genesis. They're never accused of idolatry, but obviously something was going on that caused from one of these confederations to get up and leave. So they would have been the Kenizzites, who, leaving with a leader called Midian, became known as the Midianites. So they went to Ethiopia. Now, on the 1st century BC maps you find of the Mappamundi that Augustus commissioned Agrippa to draw, Midian is inside the territory of Ethiopia. Now the Ethiopians were of numerous tribes. You had the Mercy, you have the Omo, you have the Afar, you have the Surma, you have the Hamar, you have the Bara, and even more than these. And there were no admixtures, not at that time. That came later on, because Prophet Muhammad, about 56th century Anno Domini, and he had gone down there with a band of Arabs, and they did intermingle. You also have the Meru, pardon me, which goes back to the civilization of Mohenjo-daro in India, and you find there that Kushites were there in India at that time, so you can imagine there was some intermingling, but many of the tribes, in fact the majority of the tribes in Ethiopia even today, have no admixtures. So it's significant that Abraham should name one of his sons Midian. It is also not insignificant that when Moses decided to flee from the wrath of Pharaoh, he didn't go to Canaan, he didn't go to Mesopotamia, these two countries being much nearer, he didn't go to Arabia, he didn't go to Persia, he went to Midian. So obviously if we're fleeing and in fear of our life, we're going to go to the place where we can find refuge, safety and protection. So there must have been some link going on that caused Moses to go all the way to Midian instead of to places that were much closer and still outside the remit of the Pharaoh. So I'm going somewhere with this. So we find that if we go now, we track this down. I will say this first. When we're examining history, we do have to get all the facts assembled so that we can lay a solid foundation, and upon this foundation we would advance a reasonable hypothesis to fill in the gaps that we invariably find in history, because no one was sitting down every single day, 360 days a year, going by the lunar calendar, and recording every single thing until we finally pick up a history book. So there are always gaps, and you do have to have reasonable conjectures and provide reasonable hypotheses if you want to deduce, if you like, a consistent theory as to what was going on in those intervening years for which you have no information at all. So obviously sometimes with the information you're able to do that, and you do it until new evidence is presented that causes us to re-evaluate the existing hypothesis and be willing to change that when it is reasonably challenged, because we are in pursuit of the truth. So in any event, Moses flees to Midian, and there he meets up with another priest, and that again is significant, with 7 daughters, and he marries one of the daughters, Zipporah. But if we go to Chronicles 7:38, we're going to start to find something else about Midian and Jethro. Let's go to Chronicles 7:38. We'll go elsewhere after that. And the sons of Jether, who is Jethro, Yepuneh and Pispa and Ara. So now we find out that Yepuneh was the brother-in-law of Moses, because Moses married Zipporah, his sister, the daughter of Jether, who is also known as Jethro. You'll find the name Jether in the Tanakh, translated directly from the Hebrew, while in the King James Version you'll find it in several places. Exodus 4:18 and Exodus 18:1-2, you'll find Jethro there. But he's also called Hobab, and that you'll find in Numbers 10-29, and Ruel in Exodus 2:18. So that he has several names. But what is significant is that this Jethro, or Jether, has 3 sons, Yepuneh, Pispa and Ara, and 7 daughters, so 10 children in all. So Yepuneh is actually the brother-in-law of Moses. Now another thing, that's what I meant to get to you from, when we're talking about the Midianites and leaving and going, the Kenizzites were named Midianites when they arrived in Ethiopia. You also find in Amos 9:7, where Elohim speaking to the prophet says, "Are you not as the children of the Cushite to me?" Then he's speaking, "O children of Israel." So there we're seeing that the Kabiri walked with Elohim millenniums before the Israelites did. So they must have had some knowledge of that coming in from the relationship Abraham had with Melchizedek. Because obviously if you're living in a strange land and you're walking after a particular God and you find another people doing the same thing, you're going to have some sort of interaction with them. So we see that Jethro is the father of Yepuneh. Now in real history, I think it's the Works by Josephus, he says that Egyptians had kidnapped Midianites into ancient Egypt, so we can conjecture that Jethro's sons were among those kidnapped and taken into ancient Egypt, and when Moses came to take the children of Israel out, we know the mixed multitude went out with them, Exodus 12:37, and they would have been among those. So there we have our solid foundation, because we know that Yepuneh was not a Hebrew Israelite, he's a Midianite, and Caleb, his son, is a son of Judah, so he obviously was taking his lineage from his mother. Now, just to confirm that, let's stay in Chronicles and go to Chronicles 4:13. And the sons of Kenaz, Othniel and Seraiah, and the sons of Othniel, Hathath. Okay, so the sons of Kenaz, which is Yepuneh, was Othniel. Now if we go to the book of Judges, let's go to Judges 1:1-3, we'll see that Othniel was Caleb's younger brother. That's Judges 1:1-3. Oh, wait a minute. Judges 1:13. And Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, took it, and he gave him Aksha, his daughter, to wife. So Othniel was Caleb's younger brother. Othniel is recognized on the line of Yepuneh, who's also known as Kenaz, but Caleb is not, so he would not recognize his son. So there we can see there's an issue of paternity dispute. What we have to look at is slavery. Ugly, grotesque, monstrous. It is inimical to morality and moral behavior. When you actually go into it and you think about it, Moses also was illegitimate. His father didn't marry Jochebed. He went in and he had sex with her and had these children. They were illegitimate. Caleb was also illegitimate. we look at these movies that Hollywood makes of ancient Egypt, the story of Moses, whether it's in cartoon form or not, but they glamorize slavery, but slavery is nothing like that. People don't have any choices. They have options. Option is like 9/11. Those people in those Twin Towers, they had options. Either stay in the building and be burnt to death, or commit suicide and jump out. That's an option when you have a decision to make between two things that are equally repugnant. A choice differs from this being that you have a decision to make between something which is good and something which is bad. In slavery you don't have any choices because you're not free. There were bondmen and there were bondwomen according to the text, and I am going by the text because to do otherwise would be useless, because you wouldn't even know where to start with me. So we are going by the text, and we do see that they were in slavery. Don't forget, and a lot of people do forget, the Mosaic law had not been given as yet. So people went and they did according to what seemed right and proper in their eyes. But in the sense of slavery, you'd have had women being raped, men being raped, children. I'm not saying that the ancient Egyptians did any of this, because anyone who follows me knows that my understanding of the history of ancient Egypt is diametric to that which you find in your current Bibles. But going with the text, and you're saying this is slavery, then these people had no choices, so they would have been, because slavery is inimical, it's harmful to morality, you would have found that people were promiscuous and that you had a lot of illegitimacy. Moses dealt with the illegitimacy by calling all the single mums widows. And you see within the law, laws pertaining to them, to widows, to the fatherless, to orphans. So there was a lot of horrific things going on that when you look at the movies, you don't find it in there. But we all know slavery, and slavery is not a pleasant condition for anyone who finds themselves in it. So there was some dispute with Yepuneh and Caleb's mother. He was obviously disputing the paternity. Now, I believe that is a reasonable conjecture, because everywhere we find the name of Caleb, we find Moses writing, son of Yepuneh. So obviously, when the child was born, he bore a striking resemblance to his father. But Yepuneh still would not accept Caleb. As you saw from Chronicles, recorded in Chronicles are the lines of two of his sons, but Caleb, his eldest son, he leaves completely out. So Caleb took the nationality of his mother, so his mother would have been the daughter of Judah. Now, think of it this way. Say you've got the 12 tribes, and a daughter of Dan wants to marry a convert. So say the person converted and could that enter the tribe of Dan, he wouldn't have an opportunity to say, well, okay, I'm going to marry a daughter of the Danites, but actually I'd like to take my inheritance with Manasseh or Zebulun or Judah. That's not possible. You'd have to go to the tribe of the daughter that you married. We see an excellent example of that with the daughters Zelophehad in Numbers 27, 1-7. Their father died without having a son, and they challenged the prophet Moses to provide them with an inheritance, give them the inheritance of the father, which set a precedent because it was unheard of. And Elohim said did grant them the inheritance. However, the sons of Manasseh challenged that. I think it's in Numbers 35. Let's just check it quickly. And they said, it's not fair that they have this inheritance because they can go and marry outside and they take the inheritance with them, and then obviously whichever tribe they're married into would become wealthier. And if tribes did that, actually they could get to a point where they're sort of seducing the wealthy members of different tribes. So one tribe could end up bereft, or a number of tribes could end up bereft. So where they challenged it, was it 35? No, it was 36. One out. And the fathers of the families of the children of Gilead, the son of Mashah, and the son of Manasseh, of the families of the son of Joseph, came near and spoke before Moses, and before the princes, the chief fathers, and the children of Israel. And they said, Elohim commanded my Lord to give the land for an inheritance by lot to the children of Israel. And my Lord was commanded by Elohim to give the inheritance of Zelophehad, our brother, unto his daughters. And if they be married to any of the sons of the other tribes of the children of Israel, then shall their inheritance be taken from the inheritance of our fathers, and shall be put to the inheritance of the tribe whereinto they are received. So shall it be taken from the lot of our inheritance. So they were saying that their inheritance would diminish if the wealth started going out, because wealthy daughters could now leave and marry wherever they liked. And when the jubilee of the children of Israel shall be, then shall their inheritance be put on to the inheritance of the tribe whereunto they are received. So shall their inheritance be taken away from the inheritance of the tribe of our fathers. And Moses commanded the children of Israel according to the word of Elohim, saying, The tribe of the sons of Joseph hath said well, this is the thing which Elohim doth command concerning the daughters of Zelophehad, saying, Let them marry to whom they think best, only to the family of the tribe of their father shall they marry. So with that said, you couldn't have someone converting, marrying a daughter of a particular tribe, and then thinking they could flit around to another tribe that they fancy. They would have to stay within the tribe of the daughter that they married, or the son that they married. So what we have was Yepuneh challenging or disputing the paternity of his son, and it's quite cold, when you get to Chronicles 4:13, and you see his other sons recorded, the later sons, but not Caleb, son of Yepuneh. So although Caleb took his inheritance in his mother's tribe, you see each time his name is mentioned, and it only ever happens with Caleb, he is called the son of Yepuneh. We see later on that Yepuneh's attitude softened, probably as he started to come face to face with his mortality, because the son of Caleb names one of his sons Kenaz. So after that grandfather, so we see a kind of softening of the relationship, or maybe even some sort of healing of the relationship. But for Moses, his brother-in-law behaving in like a scoundrel couldn't have been pleasant for him. So we know that slavery creates hideous conditions for people to live in, and obviously the longer they're in that state, they take on behavioral patterns that they wouldn't normally undertake, because it's been induced promiscuity, idolatry, and when it goes on for a length of time, and we're told in Genesis, I believe it's not Genesis, sorry, I think it is Exodus 12:40, that this slavery went on for 430 years. So you can imagine it going on for 430 years, no laws existing. So when Elohim came to collect his people and he gathered them, he took all of them. He didn't say to them that, oh, well, you're married to a foreign man, so he can't come, because Yepuneh is not a Hebrew Israelite, yet he's brought in with the tribes. And we see, I think it's Exodus 12:37, that a mixed multitude went up. Let's have a look at that. No, 38. Exodus 12:38. And a mixed multitude went up also with them, and flocks and herds, even very much cattle. So there Elohim took everybody up that wanted to go. There would have been Hebrew Israelite women attached to men that were not of the Hebrew Israelite lineage. There'd have been Hebrew Israelite men that were attached to women that were not of the Hebrew Israelite lineage, but they had children and all came up together. We go now to Ezra. because before we go to Ezra, let's look at Deuteronomy 32:20, and then we'll go from there. 32:20, because that was a significant thing that I actually wanted to say about slavery. Retrospectively, Elohim tells us what happens when we go into captivity. And he said, I will hide my face from them, I will see what their end shall be, for they are a very forward generation, children in whom is no faith. So Elohim hiding his face from us is equivalent of turning his back, and at the time that Elohim does that, then the law becomes suspended. Now, because Elohim made covenants with Abraham, with Isaac, with Jacob, he cannot break those covenants ever, because he forswore by his own self. And if he was to break those covenants, who could have any confidence that he would keep his word? So the covenant cannot be broken. And retrospectively, we do see in the book of Leviticus, you have to, when you make an oath, you have to keep it. So the only thing that's open to Elohim is to suspend the law. So when he says, I will hide my face from them, he says when he hides his face, the law is suspended, so it actually exists no more. So everyone goes to their own ideas. But obviously if they go into captivity, they're not going to their own ideas, they're going into absolute darkness, and a fog settles on them and they forget who they are, generation after generation. We see that again in book of Job, chapter 1, 9 to 10. And then Satan answered Elohim and said, Doth Job fear Elohim for naught? Hast not thou made an hedge about him, and about his house, and about all that he hath on every side, and hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land? So the protection of Elohim is akin to like having a spiritual hedge around us. So when we keep the law, that hedge is placed around us, and we have the protection of the Almighty, and we live in the shadow of his wings. When that protection is removed, then all the hordes of hell and their cohorts can come up against us, and we have no protection. That's what happens in slavery, and that's what happened in that period there, where they were in that slavery in ancient Egypt, and all evil overwhelmed them. You cannot then say to a people at the end of 430 years, oh, excuse me, but you were not upholding the law, so it's unfortunate that you married foreign people, but they have to stay where they are. That's a lot of rubbish. Elohim took everyone in and set that precedent, okay? So where there were women, because they plainly would have been women with children who didn't have husbands because the men didn't marry them, and Moses is an absolute proof of that. Elohim, simply the children of that woman were then accounted by her lineage and not by the fathers. Another significant thing I wanted to say to you about Yepuneh, let's go back to Chronicles, and we'll go to Chronicles 7:40, and you will see which tribe he took his inheritance in. So all these, I'll just read it from 38 and we'll go 38 to 40. And the sons of Jether, Yepuneh and Pispa and Ara, are now 40. All these were the children of Asher, heads of their father's house, choice and mighty men of valor, chief of the princes, and the number throughout the genealogy of them that were apt to the war and to battle was 26,000 men. So you see that when Yepuneh actually decided to stay with the Hebrew Israelites, he actually went to the tribe of Asher, not to Judah. So Caleb's, and obviously he was not recognized in his son, so Caleb's lineage was then established through his mother, because it was proved that she hadn't been promiscuous and had been sleeping around. You can do that from a process of elimination, because even though there was no Mosaic law, there were the Noahic laws, and we can see from then that Judah had the right, I think it's Genesis 38, he had the right to put Tamar to death for prostitution. So from that process of elimination, it wasn't that she was sleeping around or running here and there, because he could have brought a complaint against her for promiscuity or some such. But like I said, it was a period of slavery. There no rule, no elders, no heads, nobody. everybody just doing what they want. And in this case, Jephthah decided, well, you know, I'll just have sex with this woman, I'm not going to marry her, and if anything comes of it, I'll just say it's not mine. You know, there was no DNA, no way to test it, but the child coming out with the physiognomy of the father and even other physical characteristics would make that plain for them. Also, when Moses came along, he had the spirit of Elohim, which is instructive, and it would have told him that. And he insisted, as much as Yepuneh would not recognize Caleb, the prophet Moses insisted that every time the name of Caleb was mentioned, it would be mentioned with Yepuneh, to state clearly that you definitely are the father, whether you recognize it or not, so that there was no one could besmirch the name of his mother or even him. And we find that because Elohim makes very strict laws about treatment of single mothers, widows, fatherless children, orphans. So those laws would have been created in response to behavior that was unacceptable. So there may well have been people that wanted to sort of give the stink eye, if you like, to a woman with no husband and children. But that is the consequence of slavery, and Elohim set that precedent. You bring them all in. The children of the single moms will take the lineage of their mother. If they're foreign men and they be pleased to walk with Elohim, they can join their wives in their tribes. And the same goes for sons. So then, as we went along, we found a very extraordinary thing in the book of Ezra. There was a 70-year captivity in Babylon, so-called. And when they came back, Ezra found that they were married. He specifies men, but it was obviously men and women. Let's go to Ezra 1 to 3. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of Elohim by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, Elohim stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he make a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and put it also in writing, saying, Thus said Cyrus, king of Persia, Elohim, the God of heaven, hath given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he hath charged me to build him an house at Jerusalem, or Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who is there among you of all his people? His God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build the house of Elohim, the God of Israel. He is the God which is in Jerusalem. So then go to 12:15 of the same verse. 12:15, 12 to 15. Chapter 12. Mm. 10. Let's go to 10:2 to 4. And Shechaniah, the son of Jehiel, one of the sons of Elam, answered and said unto Ezra, We have trespassed against Elohim, and have taken strange wives of the people of the land. Yet now there is hope in Israel concerning this thing. Now therefore let us make a covenant with our Elohim to put away all the wives, and such as are born of them, according to the counsel of my Lord, and of those that tremble at the commandment of our God, and let it be done according to the law. So here he specifies the men, but there were women also, and the women had married foreign men and the men had married foreign women. We have evidence of that in the book of Esther. So if you want to go to Esther very quickly, and all of you know if you follow me that I don't believe that book. That book is absolutely fairy tales. There's no King Ahasuerus in the annals of world history. So go to Esther 2:17. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favour in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her a queen instead of Vashti. So this is supposed to be Persia, and she's married to a Persian king. And not only the king didn't actually seek her out, but a Hebrew Israelite took her and gave her to the king. So you can imagine that that was happening. And it's like I said before, I don't know where people get this idea that in slavery the slave just sits down and says, oh, I'll just see who I'd like to marry. There's no picking and choosing. You don't get to object because first of all, you don't actually get married. Okay? The slave master comes along and there's rape. So you can find yourself with someone who is disgusting. Well, they're disgusting anyway, as rapists are, because rape is an act of violence. It's got nothing to do with sex at all. But there's no picking and choosing. Okay, the person could have gonorrhea, they could have syphilis, they could have poor hygiene, they could have violent behavior, even homicidal behavior. What can the slave say? Oh, I prefer not to have that. There's no choice in slavery. So to actually even imagine that these slaves are going to be taken off to Babylon for 70 years, and in 70 years they're going to get to pick and choose who they marry. No, Ezra was dealing with Hebrew Israelite women who had married foreign men, and he was dealing with Hebrew Israelite men who had married foreign women. But he took the and even when he says his prayer, when he's praying to Elohim, he invokes Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy 7:3. So he's talking about where Elohim says that you shouldn't give your sons to their daughters nor take their daughters for your son. But if it was specific to the men only, the men were doing the going off with foreign women, and the women were pristine because like they had some choice as slaves, he would have gone for Exodus 34:16, which deals specifically with men, the sons of Israel, taking foreign women, and has nothing to do with daughters. But he doesn't use that. Instead, he uses the precedent of Caleb. So he allows the foreign men and the children of the foreign men who have returned go in. I think he was working on the premise that one, the mother of the child has absolute control and power over her child, so can imbue and inculcate that child with their spirit and teach them about their God, whereas a foreign woman who doesn't know Elohim could only, well, that's the premise they were working on and he was working on, they could only inculcate their child with the spirit of their former gods, and that would contaminate the lineage. So sending away the women removed them from having any control over the children. But the fact that he sent away the children with the women meant that he was given a very strict application of the law that wasn't actually inside the law, because the thing that he missed out of that was the part where this was captivity and slavery. So you don't send people away at all. Now what you have with the Mosaic law, the law is the law. Deuteronomy 4:2, you can't add to it, you can't subtract to it. No prophet subsequent to the prophet Moses can add anything to the law, and the law is plain. Where there is captivity, where there is slavery, and Elohim gathers in his people, all of them come in. So the men who had taken foreign women as wives and had children with them and families, they would come in with their children. And with it goes the same with the women, the single parents, etc. They would all come in with Elohim. So what Ezra did is very strange because it goes against the law. There's another book of Ezra as well that says that, okay, well, there was no law and he was going according to what he could remember. But even that doesn't make any sense. The Hebrew Israelites have a tradition of walking with the entire Mosaic law in our head. That is memorizing it in its entirety and having it in their head. This slavery in Babylon, so-called Babylon, it was only for 70 years. So there must have been people who still had that law in their head. Also, even if we accept that Ezra forgot absolutely everything, how could he forget that Moses married a Midianite and then married an Ethiopian? Both his wives and the children from both were acceptable to Elohim. How could he forget that? So we have those evidence there that not only were the Israelite women, Hebrew Israelite women, in relationships with foreign men, marrying foreign men, having children for foreign men, so were the Hebrew Israelite males. And what Elohim did, and according to the Mosaic law, was all of them get to come in, but not only the men and their wives and their children, but also the women with their husbands and their children, if the men and the women be pleased to walk after Elohim and observe all his ways. The other thing is, where lineage is established to the patriarchal line among the Hebrew Israelites, that is only when a Hebrew Israelite man is married to a Hebrew Israelite woman. That's when the law, that is the law and strictly applied, because neither are the men supposed to go anywhere else with foreign women, or the women to go anywhere else with foreign men. But when in a crisis situation, and we can categorize slavery as a crisis, then all the rules, all the laws are all out of the window, because we don't have any choice. You can't say to your slave master, oh, excuse me, but you know what, I remember I'm supposed to keep the Sabbath, can I have a day off? Don't be ridiculous. Slavery doesn't operate that way. When Elohim turns his face away, when he turns his back, when he removes his hedge, that means the law is suspended and we are no longer under the protection of the law. Now that we're returning to him and we're observing the law, we bring ourselves back under the protection of the law, and then the law begins to apply. So obviously, knowing the law, if you go out there and you're going to marry foreign women when you've got Hebrew Israelite women, those children are not going to be brought in because you know better. But when you're under that, in that darkness and under that fog of evil that is removed from you, because even when we read it in Exodus 28, he tells us we won't even remember who we are. And that's exactly what happened. But when you have the situation of slavery, so you have that crisis situation where nobody knows who they are, nobody knows anything about the law, everyone does what is right and proper in their eyes, or what they're able to do according to the conditions that they find themselves in. When Elohim gathers us in, then he gathers in everyone. So it's not just the men saying, oh, lineage established to the patriarchal seed, so whoever we've been with, they're Hebrew Israelites, but the women are not, because that plainly is not correct. What happens is that all come in. So the women with their children, maybe their partners or husbands, the men with their women, their children, partners or husband, and it is always about going forward that you observe the law, so that your children would not be able to marry outside. They wouldn't be able to go marrying foreign people. They'd have to marry within the 12 tribes and within their own specific tribe. So in a crisis situation, a child's lineage may be established to the mother. So if you have, say, a black woman approaching you and she's saying to you, oh, my father is Caucasian but my mother is black, you can't be sending her away, because she was in the same situation as all of us were in, and the mother also had no idea that what she was doing was wrong. So if they be pleased to walk after Elohim and walk in all his ways and keep his commandments, then they can come into, as the mixed multitude did when Moses took the children of Israel out of Egypt. So you've got to remember that there are exceptions to every rule. Shalom.